on lonely roads, an old highway. The blue man walks and jaunts and sways, a cold black heart and ivory smile. He walk you down that long last mile. Franklin always liked to remind folks not to call him Franklin. No, sir, that's what his parents called him. Just call him Frankie. He'd lean in real close while he was saying this, then you get a noseful of whatever he'd been drinking that night. Big Johnny Walker Halliwell ran the bar, and you could always tell that he wanted to throw Frankie out on his ear. Frankie was always coming and drinking the cheap stuff, never leaving tips, and the man talked. Dear gosh in heaven, the man just never knew when to shut up. From 9 to 12, Frankie would just dominate his little corner of the bar without non-stop talking. Sports, politics, religion, it just didn't matter. His mouth would flap from sun up to sundown.
Now see, that's just what I've been trying to see you see.
Frankie tapped the bar with his finger a few times, a sound that would grate on Johnny by night's end. Frankie's victim for the night was Joe Gamble, the only man unfortunate enough to be sitting near Frankie. Joe looked from side to side, hoping that someone might save him. Johnny wasn't about to end up listening to Frankie all night. Frankie would weave along the bar following Johnny, holding his drink aloft. Frankie threw back the last of his drink, giving Joe the break he needed to get out of there. Joe darted off and set the restroom door swinging. Frankie looked around after he had finished his drink, and turning back to the bar, he motioned to Big Johnny. Johnny stalked over and stared Frankie down.
I'm cutting you off for the night, Frankie. Get out.
Frankie straightened up and assumed a look of righteous, drunken indignation. But it wasn't exactly a new turn of events.
Fine. I was just on my way home anyway.
His hand flopped into his pocket, and Johnny heard the jingle of keys.
Call a cab, Frankie. There's no way you're driving home like that.
Frankie spun on his heel and fell against the bar.
You should have thought of that before you told me to leave.
And he stomped out of the bar, slamming the door shut behind him. Johnny sighed and went back to work. Not his problem. Frankie managed to get the car started and pulled out of the parking lot, doing so with great care, but still nearly backing into another car. He spun the wheel sharply to the right and managed to avoid it, and was on his way down the road. He headed down the highway, which, thankfully, was more or less deserted in this area at this hour. Frankie leaned over his steering wheel and peered hard through the windshield, keeping his eyes locked onto the road with razor precision. His eyes locked onto the black pavement as he slowly moved out of the lane, into the emergency stop-only lane, and then off the shoulder completely. Frankie jumped as the car shook, the two right wheels kicking up gravel. The headlights caught a quick flash of something blue right in front of him. Frankie slammed his foot on the brakes and felt a thump. The car now stopped, headlights beaming absently into the darkness. Frankie sat stock still in the seat, a trickle of fear penetrating his alcohol-induced stupor. A man lay in the grass about 10 feet from his front bumper. Frankie's heart started thudding in his chest. Did he hit the guy? He should go and check on him. Frankie managed to get the door open after a few tries, and left the car running to check on the denim-clad man in the road. But when Frankie got there, the man was already up and walking away from him, headlights lighting up his back. Frankie felt relief flood through him. There weren't even grass stains on the man's jacket.
Hey guy, hey, you okay? Did I hit ya?
No response. Frankie ran up behind him.
Hey guy, did I hit ya? 'Cause I didn't mean to. Had a couple beers, you know. Didn't mean to hit ya if I did. Are you okay? Or you need to go to the hospital?
Frankie grabbed the man by the shoulders with both hands and spun the blue man around. Black eyes. Frankie let go of the blue man and stared at his hands. He screamed. He backed away and fell over his own feet, kicking and scrambling away from the blue man, who just watched Frankie, smiling, his teeth glinting in the headlights. Frankie managed to get back to his feet and ran, leaving his car by the side of the road, the light still illuminating the blue man. Frankie tucked his hands into his armpits and kept running and didn't stop until he reached his house. He kicked down his own door and burst inside. He panted and looked around the house. Sweat was pouring down his face and his heart was a jackhammer. He ignored it all. He needed to get clean. Had to wash his hands and get clean. He needed hot water. Had to clean those hands, sterilize them, clean them. He went into his kitchen and ducked down to root through one of the cabinets. Pulled out a pot. He quickly filled it with water and threw it on the stove, turning the burner on full. He watched the metal coils start to glow red hot, and the water bubbled in turn. He waited until the water reached a rolling boil and then thrust his hands in. They turned red and blistered immediately under water, but Frankie said nothing, just grinned an empty grin and boiled his hands. The grin faded and turned into a snarl. He wasn't clean. He had to get clean. He threw the water off the stove and grabbed the burner directly. Steam rose from his hands and he heard them pop and sizzle. He began to smile again, but that too faded. He removed his hands and there were charred, smoking areas on the hot burner in the shape of his hands. He stared at his ruined hands, the flesh still popping and smouldering. It wasn't enough. Still dirty. Still not clean. He held his hands out from his body as if they were dead animals and tried to think. He brightened and went out to the garage. He kicked things over, threw things aside, worked himself into a rage until he found it. The gas can for the lawnmower. It was difficult, but he finally managed to get it open and pour a liberal amount of gasoline onto each hand. He stood there with his dripping hands and realised he had no way to light them. He began to pound his fists against the wall, and then a smile lit up on his face. He ran back around to the grill and found a small stick lighter. He scrabbled for it, got a grip on it, and began to click it while it was pointed at his left hand. There was a gout of flame, and suddenly both his hands were burning brightly. Frankie smiled. That was much better. His hands were clean now. A year later, Frankie sat at the end of the bar, not talking to anyone. He used one of his hooks to pull the glass near him, and then drank the rock gut whiskey with a straw. That's how he drank his alcohol now. Johnny stared at Frankie and wondered what did happen to him the night he left the bar. He'd asked Frankie, but Frankie didn't talk anymore. Not one word. If he wanted a drink, he pointed. No more politics. No more religion. No more weather. Just silence. No one knew why he burned off his own hands. It just happened out of the blue. Johnny shrugged. It's just the way things are sometimes. It's just the way